"Eat," he said calmly, sliding the plate across the table. It was June 1963, and the restaurant was packed shoulder to shoulder, loud with laughter, clinking glasses, and live music bleeding through the air. But at one table near the back, something was wrong. The man sitting there couldn't lift his fork. His hands were shaking too hard. His breath came in short, panic bursts. Across from him sat Bumpy Johnson, quiet, composed, eyes steady like he had all the time in the world. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He didn't need to, because the man facing him had just realized something impossible had happened. The past wasn't buried. It was sitting right in front of him. For 11 years, he had believed this moment would never come. 11 years of power, money, protection, and sleep without fear. 11 years of convincing himself that the man he betrayed was gone for good. But now Bumpy Johnson was here, older, quieter, unchanged in the only way that mattered. And when their eyes met, the betrayer collapsed. Not metaphorically. His shoulders slumped. His face drained of color. The confidence he'd worn like armor shattered in seconds. Conversations around them faltered. One by one, voices dropped. Forks froze midair. The music faded. A room full of people instinctively understood they were witnessing something they would talk about for the rest of their lives. The room went silent. Stay with me, because what happened next will shock you. And hey, drop a comment right now. Where in the world are you watching this from? This wasn't just two men sitting at a table. This was 11 years of theft, silence, and calculated betrayal collapsing into a single moment. While Bumpy Johnson counted days behind concrete walls, someone else had been counting his money, his streets, his name, his people. The man shaking in that chair hadn't just taken advantage of an absence. He had rewritten history in it. He stepped into a world that Bumpy built, used the connections Bumpy forged, and claimed a respect that was never his to claim. And for more than a decade, nobody challenged him, because everyone believed the same lie, that Bumpy Johnson was gone forever. That's why this moment mattered more than revenge. If Bumpy stood up and walked away, it would confirm what every hustler, every traitor, every opportunist wanted to believe, that loyalty only mattered until power changed hands. That betrayal paid. That patience was weakness. But if Bumpy stayed, if he addressed this betrayal face-to-face and in public, then everything would shift. The rules would reset. The silence in that room wasn't fear of violence. It was fear of what this moment would decide. Because by the time one man stood up from that table, Harlem would belong to someone again. And everyone there knew it wouldn't belong to the betrayer. For 11 years, the man now struggling to breathe had lived like nothing could touch him. While Bumpy Johnson was locked away, aging behind steel doors, this man had stepped into a ready-made empire and made himself comfortable inside it. He wore expensive suits, drank the best liquor, and sat at the best tables. People greeted him with respect, sometimes fear, sometimes forced smiles, but always obedience. He didn't build the foundation, he inherited it. And over time, he convinced himself that was the same thing. He told himself he deserved it, that someone had to keep things running, that the streets needed a steady hand. And as the years passed with no sign of Bumpy's return, confidence hardened into arrogance. The money kept coming. The protection stayed in place. The stories about the past faded into whispers. New faces rose, who had never even seen Bumpy, only heard the name like a myth. To them, this man was the king now. And slowly, dangerously, he began to believe it too. That belief was what made this collapse so complete. He had mistaken silence for permission, absence for erasure. He thought time itself had buried the past. But power built on betrayal doesn't disappear, it waits. And in that silent room, with his legs barely holding him upright, he finally understood the truth. Everything he'd enjoyed for 11 years had never been his. It had only been borrowed, and the owner had come back to collect. When Bumpy Johnson finally returned, there were no headlines waiting for him. No celebrations. No crowds. He came back the same way he lived, quietly, deliberately, without asking permission. The years had changed his appearance, but not his presence. There was gray in his hair now, weight in his posture, a stillness that came from having too much time to think and nothing left to prove. Prison hadn't broken him. It had refined him. He didn't rush to reclaim anything. He didn't make speeches or send warnings. His first move wasn't violence. It was information. Names. Patterns. Who had stayed loyal. Who had gotten rich. Who had crossed lines they hoped would never be revisited. One by one, the picture came into focus. And among all the names, one stood out sharper than the rest. Not because of power alone, but because of history. Because this wasn't just a rival. This was someone who had been trusted, taught, protected. Someone who knew exactly what loyalty meant, and chose to abandon it anyway. Bumpy understood something most men didn't. Time doesn't erase betrayal. It compounds it. Every quiet year, every stolen dollar, every night of comfort built pressure that had to be released eventually. He knew the reckoning wouldn't come through chaos. It would come through precision, through timing, through letting the right person realize, at the worst possible moment, that the past was standing right in front of them. And now, sitting calmly in that room, Bumpy wasn't there to announce his return. He was there to let everyone else discover it for themselves. The man who had ruled that room for years walked in the same way he always did, relaxed, smiling, surrounded by confidence that came from never being challenged. He expected nods. He expected space to open up. He expected control. Then his eyes lifted, just for a second, and everything inside him collapsed. Sitting only a few feet away was Bumpy Johnson, calm, seated with his back to the wall, watching him like he'd been expected all along. There was no anger on Bumpy's face, no satisfaction, just recognition. And that was worse. The change was instant and undeniable. Color drained from the betrayer's face. His smile died halfway into existence. His steps slowed, then stopped altogether. People close enough saw his hands start to shake. Those who knew him best saw something they had never seen before. Fear without a place to hide. He tried to steady himself, tried to breathe through it, but the weight of 11 years crashed down all at once. He understood, in that single frozen second, that this meeting wasn't accidental and it wasn't negotiable. Around them, the room reacted without anyone saying a word. Conversations faded into whispers, then disappeared entirely. Chairs stopped moving. Glasses paused midair. Even the people who didn't know exactly what was happening felt it. The air had changed. This wasn't about violence yet. It was about authority being exposed. The man who thought he owned the room realized he never had. And the man he betrayed didn't need to stand up to prove it. The confrontation had already happened the moment their eyes met. Bumpy didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The fear in the man across from him was already doing the work. Bumpy Johnson spoke slowly, deliberately, naming the things that had been taken. Not just money or territory, but trust. Years of silence. Promises broken while one man counted days, and the other counted profits. The betrayer tried to explain himself, tried to turn fear into logic, betrayal into survival. His words tumbled over each other, desperate and hollow. Every excuse only made the truth heavier. What terrified the room wasn't anger, it was restraint. Bumpy listened. He let the man speak. Then he made it clear this was never about negotiation. Death would have been simple, quick, forgettable. This was about memory, about making sure the lesson lasted longer than fear ever could. When the punishment came, it was deliberate and precise. Enough to end the illusion of power forever. Enough to ensure that every time the man looked in a mirror, he would remember this moment. And everyone else would too. No one rushed forward. No one screamed. The room stayed frozen, not from shock alone, but from understanding. They were witnessing what real authority looked like. Not chaos, not rage, but control. The kind that didn't need to destroy a body to end a reign. The man who had ruled that room was finished, and everyone there knew it. He was alive. But what he'd been pretending to be was gone forever. When it was over, Bumpy Johnson didn't stay to celebrate. He didn't explain himself. He stood, straightened his coat, and walked out the same way he had walked in. Calm, unhurried, unquestioned. Behind him, the room remained silent, not because people were afraid to speak, but because they knew they had just witnessed a turning point. By morning, every corner of Harlem would be buzzing with the same story, told in different voices, but carrying the same meaning. The past hadn't stayed buried. The king had returned. The impact was immediate. Men who had grown bold during Bumpy's absence quietly stepped back. Deals unraveled. Alliances dissolved without confrontation. No war was announced, yet everything changed. The message was clear without being shouted. Loyalty still mattered, betrayal still carried a price, and power hadn't shifted hands the way everyone assumed it had. One moment, one room, one silent confrontation had reset the balance. That night became legend not because of how much blood was spilled, but because of how little was needed. It proved something people rarely understand until it's too late. Real power doesn't rush, doesn't beg, and doesn't explain itself. It waits. And when it finally shows up, the room goes quiet, because everyone knows exactly who they're standing in front of.